someone who will say, oh, but traditionally these were our things. As Sinu brought to light, there was a very valid reason to...
Internet, or how do we do it?
I think the starting point needs to be initiating conversation, which is why I think we're all here today, and which is why I was very, very happy to support this initiative, because I think we don't talk about it enough, and that's the gist of what everybody has been saying here. Even though culturally we had different routes approaching menstruation. So I think the starting point needs to be generation of more dialogue, more conversation, because only when you talk about something will you ask about it. So I have a thumb rule for any issue. I think the first thing you've got to do is discuss. When you start discussing something, which so far has not been spoken about, it comes into the forefront. So even though you may be uncomfortable about it initially, the discussion process starts. Then a few people will debate it. So there will be, someone who will say, oh, but traditionally these were our things. As Sinu brought to light, there was a very valid reason to begin with why women couldn't go into temples. It has now been convoluted and brought to a point where, it's almost become sexist. That's the interpretation of it. So then debate will happen. So discussion, dialogue, debate, and then change happens. There's always a 3-stage process required to bring about any societal change, whether it's something as basic as trying to abolish sati. We required a law to stop people from burning women when their husbands died. Women were doing it voluntarily as well, but a law was required to actually stop sati by the British. So logically, the precursor to that law was people like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Dayanand Saraswati, who spoke about the need to challenge these norms. So the first step is always discussion, discourse, dialogue, debate. Only once these 3 steps have been, it's a natural anthropological evolutionary cycle in any society with any issue. So when an issue needs to be taken out from the back, brought into the front, there is a life cycle like a butterfly has to go through for it to finally be free. And that is initiated through discussions like this. We have discussions, we have debates, we have discourse, and finally comes awareness, and then comes change. So we are sitting at a point where there is aggressive intervention by brands like Stayfree that are pushing the envelope. So that's where aggressive intervention comes and disrupts the natural process of change. So disruption is a very popular word for those of you who are in the tech business. I'm an entrepreneur, I have a tech startup. So the more disruptive you are in the current environment, the quicker your rate of acceleration of change is. So when brands come forward to do aggressive intervention is when you can accelerate the process of change and disrupt the normal cycle of dialogue, debate, discussion, and then change. So they become catalysts for change, so to speak. So of course it will still take time, but this intervention that they're doing, and how we are all part of this, and our friends in the media will use the power of their pen to put the might behind this action, is when change will actually happen. And it is a process, again, anthropologically, any change in society needs 3 generations. That's 15 times 3, so 45 years, unless there is disruptive action and aggressive intervention.
So we have taken the first step in
Absolutely.
the right direction.
Gul, but 45 years is hell of a lot of time. Yeah, none of us will be around then.
I know, which is the sad part, which is why more of us need to disrupt.
Yeah.
Everybody sitting in this room needs to play their part in disrupting this process. Because unless you disrupt it, the change works like this. First generation becomes aware. It then passes on that value system. And this is not just about menstruation or about sex education. It's about any change which challenges societal conditioning. So the first generation becomes aware, they ask, may not agree with the change. The next generation, their children, 15 years, of course, hopefully we're not giving birth in 15 years, but from an anthropological, sociological perspective, 15 years is considered a generation. The next generation begins to understand why the first generation was discussing and debating this, And the third generation is actually neutral and ready to adopt the change. So the third generation is where the benefit of the change will come. So let's say 30 years. I mean, 15, that 15 we can play with, but we have to disrupt the process and aggressively intervene to accelerate that change. It's a great initiative by Stayfree. I think menstrual hygiene and menstrual health needs a lot more awareness, and I'm glad that they've stepped forward to take aggressive intervention in this process and actually try and help create that awareness and education that's much needed. In our society, we don't talk about things that are to do with reproduction or menstruation because it's just considered taboo. People are too inhibited. So this is a great conversation starter, and I do hope they have more conversations like this, which in time to come will hopefully help us as a society to shed these inhibitions that surround an issue like this. Most welcome.